Hi friends, welcome to my another video. Today in this video, I will discuss what are the cause of motor overload, meaning what are the common reason for the motor overload that cause the motor overheat. It is very obvious that the motor generate heats when it is running, but when the generated heat by the motor during its function it's dissipated, then that heat won't be. The problem arises when the motor due to any reason taking more than its rated current. When the motor start taking more than its rated current, then the motor generates more heat which could not be dissipated in the same rate as it was dissipated when the motor taking normal rated current. So that will cause the motor overheating and which will lead to many critical damage to the motor. So let us understand what are the common reason for the motor overload which resulting motor overheating. There are two major reasons for the motor overload. One is called electrical reason and another is called mechanical reason. So let us understand one by one what is the electrical reasons for the motor overload and what are the mechanical reasons for motor overload. The first reason which we will discuss for the motor overload is a rotor locking. What is it? Suppose the motor has some capacity to run the motor, and on this motor the load we are keep on increasing during its running condition. Then what will happen at after some stage? Due to keep on adding the load on the motor, the motor will not capable to generate that much torque that loads required. Then gradually the motor will slow down and it will come to the standstill position. But at that time there is power in the motor winding. This condition is called pull out torque of the motor, which is due to the motor locking. As the motor rotor is completely stopped due to this pull out torque, but the motor stator winding have the current, then the flux linkage with the rotor winding is maximum, and in that case the current in the rotor winding is also maximum, which will lead to the overheating of the motor. Hope you understood this rotor locking. The other mechanical reason for the motor overload is the misalignment of shaft between the motors and the load. The third reason for the motor overload is the motor under designing. What does it mean? Suppose we have to design the motor for a particular load which required a torque of 50 Newton meter. Okay, but by doing some calculation and mistakenly we design a motor which having the torque capacity of 40 Newton meter. And whenever we connect this load which required 50 Newton meter torque, then this motor won't be enough capable to rotate that load. And to meet the load requirement, motor will draw more and more current from its winding, which lead to the overcurrent in the motor, which lead to the overheating of the motor, which is called also the motor overloading condition. The other reason is the higher ambient temperature. Let us take an example that this motor ambient temperature is 40 degrees Celsius as per the manufacturer datasheet. But we kept this motor on an ambient condition where the temperature is 50 degrees Celsius. Then the motor will get heated easily even though it is drawing rated current or less than its rated current. Then that time the motor for the normal current it's get heated due to higher we kept the motor in the higher ambient condition, and that lead us to tell that the motor is overloaded. The other reason is poor ventilation. Suppose the ambient temperature is okay, but the heat which is generated by the motor during operation has no path to dissipate into the atmosphere. Then the heat will keep on adding in that room where the motor is running, and after certain interval of time, the motor get abnormally heated, which lead the motor to be overheating. The other reason is very important, which is the electrical reason of the motor overload is the phase loss. Suppose any one of the phase get lost due to any reason, then the other two phases will try to draw more current to meet the load torque demand. In that time, the motor other two phases will take more and more current from the supply, and it will lead to the overcurrent in the motor, which finally result to the overloading or we can say overheating. The other reason for the motor overload is the bearing failure. Suppose we know that there is a bearing at the shaft end and at the tail end of the motor to support the shaft and to give a friction free path or minimal friction path to rotate the rotor. Due to mechanical friction, the bearing fails, then the motor to achieve the same torque required more power to rotate. In that time, the motor will take more and more current from the supply, and that lead the motor to be in overloaded, which result to overheating of the motor. The other reason for the motor of overload is the frequent on and off operation of the motor. We know the motor always have its duty cycle that could be S1, S2, S3. Depend on that cycle, we have to operate the motor. Here you can see that there are different duty cycle for different motors like S1, S2, S3, S4, S5, S6, S7 and S8. Based on the duty cycle of the motor, the operation of motor will differ. Like S1 duty type motor can work continuously without giving its rest for the longer time. The S2 duty type motor can work only for the short time, and after running it's required enough time to cool down. The S3 type motor can work periodically duty, intermittent periodically duty. What does it mean? Means the motor will start and again it will stop. Then again it will start and it will stop. And it will be continuous. So that type of duty cycle of the motor is called S3 type. Here I will not go in detail what are the duty cycle of the motor, as already I have video on the duty cycle of the motor. Link I will provide in the description box. Our topic was that what are the common cause for the overheating. So one of the reason is that we are operating the motor wrongly by not considering its duty cycle. Suppose I have a motor which having the duty cycle is S1, meaning we have to start the motor and it should run continuously. But whenever same S1 duty type motor, what we will do, we are running and then stopping, again we are running and stopping, again running and stopping the motor, then this motor will get heat up, because this motor is not designed for the S2 type of work duty. It is designed for the S1 duty type. That is also one reason for the motor overload or motor overheating. One of the reason for the motor overload is the nuisance tripping in the circuit. What does it mean? Suppose I have a panel and it has one incoming and several outgoings. One of the outgoings of this panel is the motor. Due to the fault in one of the circuit, okay, the incomer of this main panel is tripping. This is called the nuisance tripping, undesirable tripping of the electrical circuit. Due to the tripping of the incomer, the running motor get tripped, because as the incomer of the panel get tripped. And if this happen frequently, then motor again and again has to start, and at the time of starting, motor taking high inrush current which heating up the motor. But when we, due to this nuisance tripping, again and again we have to start the motor, which lead the motor to overheated. The other reason for the motor overload is the unstable power supply voltage and current. When that would be the case that the power supply voltage is fluctuating, then it will also lead the motor in the overload condition. The other reason is the motor aging. With the age of the motor, the mechanical bearing of the motor, the winding insulation of the motor get degraded, and in the lesser amount of current, the winding get more heated when compared to when it was new. So the aging of the motor is also one of the reason of overloading. The other reason is the lubrication. If there is a poor lubrication in the motor bearing, then this could be also the reason of motor overload and motor overheating. So far, we covered the major reason for the motor overload or motor overheating. Now let us understand how to identify that the motor is overloaded or motor is getting overheated. The some symptoms we can check in the motor, and from that we can conclude that the motor is running in the overload condition. The first one is you will find a burning smell nearby the motor when the motor will run in a overload condition. The other symptom which you will find when the motor is running in overload condition is that motor create more sound while running than its usual. So by observing the louder sound nearby the motor, we can also identify from the sound of the motor that the motor is running in overload condition. The other way to identify that the motor is running in overload condition is by observing the trip relay, circuit breaker and blown fuse. Suppose you already place overload protection for a motor like overload relay, fuse and a circuit breaker. Okay, and you find that the fuse is blown or the overload is tripped, then you can observe or you can conclude that the motor was running in the overload condition, and due to this overload condition, the OLR, overload relay, got tripped. So you have to verify the reason why the motor has been working in the overload condition. So these are the three things from where you can conclude that the motor is running in the overload condition. And what are the precautions we have to take that the motor should not run in overload condition? The first thing, we have to place the overload protection circuit breakers, OLR, and the fuse to the motor in order to protect the motor from the overload condition. We have to verify the voltage and current when the motor is running, and we have to note that this voltage and current is nearby the rated current and voltage for the motor. The other thing, we have to observe the mechanical load connected with the motor. If there is a problem with the mechanical load connected with the motor, that could also become one reason for the motor overloading. So we have to always keep eyes on the connected mechanical load of the motor in order to prevent motor from future overload. I hope after watching this video, you will have crystal clear information related to the different cause of motor overload. If you find this video informative, then please hit thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Please share this video with your electrical friends and hit the bell icon for the future updates. We will meet in any other video. Till then, take care, keep learning, and bye-bye. Thank you so much.